Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins, and I'm here with Janet Rice, a recently retired Australian Greens senator. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate about the eco-socialist program that I ran on when I was the Green Party candidate in the U.S. in 2020. And so, Janet, I'm not going to give you a long introduction. Why don't you give an introduction to yourself? How you got into Greens? How you ended up a senator? You have like a dozen senators in the Australian Senate out of 76. That would be like the Greens having 15 or 20 senators in the U.S. Senate. So why don't you tell us how we got to that point here in Australia?
Yep, very happy to. I mean, it's a bit of how long have you got, because I could give you the whole full story, but I'll try and keep it short. But good morning. Welcome to Footscray here in Melbourne. It's a fairly cool, damp morning this morning. Right in the middle of the last week of our federal election campaign, which is, so I've got a big day and then a big week ahead sort of out there on the hustings campaigning. I was actually one of the founders of the Greens here in Victoria 33 years ago. I originally did a science degree, way back when, learned about climate change when I was 20, remember distinctly that moment of thinking, this is bloody serious. The world's going to have to do something about this. And much the same time, when I was at university, I also was involved with a huge nature conservation campaign to be protecting the wild Franklin River in southwest Tasmania, which was a really pivotal, massive campaign in Australia's environmental history, and we won. And it was a campaign that involved tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people right across the country being organised, and a very long campaign, and we won. So on learning about climate change at the same time as I was involved with the Franklin, I thought, well, okay, what we need to do is to just, build a mass community movement, and we can tackle climate change and we can win. Very much sort of learning about the power of mobilisation, the power of movement. So I then got involved as an environment campaigner. I, in fact, wanted to be a climate campaigner, but back in those days, there weren't any jobs for climate campaigners. So I ended up working as a nature conservation campaigner, particularly protecting the magnificent old growth forests that we've got here in southeastern Australia, and huge eucalypt and rainforest forests. We were pretty successful. We got some areas protected in national parks, but other areas that the governments of the time just would refuse to listen, despite the presence of, incredibly biodiverse forests, threatened species. The logging continued. And I got fed up with lobbying both parties, the Labor Party, the Liberal Party. And I distinctly remember a Labor Party backbencher saying, well, we don't need to do what you want us to do, because the people who care about forests or social justice or anything else, they're going to vote for us anyway. And the penny dropped that there wasn't anywhere else for their vote to go at that time. And the wonders of the Australian political system with preferential voting, of course, is that it's viable to then set up alternative voices without undermining the just slightly more progressive party, the Labor Party, compared with our Conservative Party, which confusingly is called the Liberals. And so I then decided, we needed the Greens. And this was just after the Greens had formed in Tasmania, when Bob Brown and others had been elected to the Tasmanian Parliament as Green independents. And so they had formed the Greens in Tasmania. So I said, we need the Greens. And so I then threw myself into being a founding member of the Greens. And we started the party in December 1992. We had 17 members. The meeting was, our initial founding meeting was outside in a park under a tree, because somebody had forgotten to collect the key for the community centre that we were meant to be meeting in. And from those small beginnings, we're up to where we are now.
Yeah, that's more inauspicious than we started, but you're way ahead of where we are in the United States. I mean, I was at the first national organizing meeting in August 1984. It was at a university, invitation only. I got invited because I was an anti-nuclear activist. And I won't go into that story, but I think, and that's one of the reasons I'm here in Australia, is that the American Greens can learn a lot from you. I mean, of course, the political system, which is proportional ranked choice voting, we would call it in the Senate. You call it
Well, we've got in the Senate, we've got proportional voting. So you've got a multi-member electorate. So when I was, cutting to the last 10 years when I've been in the Senate, at any Senate election in each state, there are 12 senators. There are 6 senators elected, and they serve for 2 terms. So there are 12 senators from each state. And so at any one election, in the Senate, there are 6 elected, and so it means to get a Greens elected after preferences, you need a quota of 14.3%. So it's very feasible for us as a Green Party to get.
And that's roughly 1/6 of the
That's
vote.
right. And so we get, our primary vote now is in the order of about 12%. So we're pretty close to a quota. And so certainly after getting preferences from other progressive parties, we are pretty confident of getting a senator elected in each state at every election, which means that's why we've got 12 senators in the Senate, and the 6 who are currently up for re-election, we're pretty confident, obviously we're campaigning hard, but we're pretty confident that they will get back. But in our lower house, that's much more difficult to break into, because there we've got 150 seats, and they're single member electorates. The benefit compared with the US system is at least we haven't got first past the post voting. We've got what we call preferential voting, which I think goes by a number of other names, ranked
choice voting is the popular
voting.
name in the United
That's
States
right,
now.
exactly.
And when we do the proportional voting, we call it proportional ranked choice voting.
Right, yes.
So if there are like 6 seats in a Senate district here, you would rank your choices. So
exactly.
For the voter, you just go in and rank your choices.
Yes, yes. Exactly. And that's what happens. I mean, when voters are going to the polls, which we've got early voting going on at the moment, so 1 million people have already voted in our federal election, which the actual election day is next Saturday. People get 2 ballot papers. They get their House of Reps one, which you've got to number every box. And, in the electorate that I'm in, there are 6 candidates standing. So we hand them a how to vote card that says, this is our recommendation as how you should preference. And then in the Senate, similarly, you've got to number at least 6 boxes, but there are, I don't know how many, tens, if not 100 people standing for the Senate.
Well, we've been advancing on ranked choice voting, although mostly in the United States, it's been single member district ranked choice voting, like your house. And I've been using the Australian example to tell people we got to push for multi-seat proportional ranked choice voting so we get proportional representation.
Exactly.
And you can see it in Australia. The Greens have had about a dozen senators for a long time because it's proportional. But in the House, it was 1.
Yes.
And in the last election, you got 3 more.
That's right.
Which is quite an accomplishment. It would be like us electing 4 members of the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
Or actually, they have 150 senators. So for us, it would be like electing 8.
Yeah,
so
that's right, and we know. I mean, at this election, sort of holding on to those 4 seats is sort of our number one task that we've got at hand. But we've got about another 4 or 5 seats around the country where we are hopeful with very focused, concentrated campaigning, and that's sort of one of our lessons over the years is to pick our battles and to know where to put our resources, and putting our resources into those seats where we think that we've got a chance of winning. So here in Melbourne, there are 2 seats which we are hoping, we've got an excellent chance of winning, where we've both campaigned really hard over in recent years. So the seat of Wills, the seat of McNamara. McNamara, we have come this close to winning over the last 3 elections. And then here, where we are in the inner western suburbs, previously working class, highly multicultural, we've got a seat called Fraser, where my dear friend Hung Trong, who's the daughter of Vietnamese refugees, a fabulous community campaigner and activist on everything from climate to Palestine. We are running a really strong campaign here. And we don't know, she might win, she might not, but she's certainly going to be in with a chance.
Well, I've been taking pictures of the posters you use for your candidates. And also you have issue posters. We were talking about Palestine before. You have a Sanction Israel poster.
Yes.
Or fund public housing, or dental into Medicare.
Yes.
I mean, these are things we talk about in the United States, but we don't have the posters like you do. So I will get those posted somewhere where people can see them. I think they're a good model for us. Talk about the organizing that was done to create the basis for these House races in particular. I know there was a lot of canvassing, sustained over time and community organizing. Talk a little bit about that, because let me just say this. I think you have strategically in Australia picked some House districts. The Canadian Greens have done that. The Greens of England and Wales have done that. And we don't do that in the United States. And it might be a good idea if we did.
And it's a balance, because, I mean, we've got thousands of members right across the country, and most of them don't live in seats that we have got a chance of winning in our lower house seats. So you can't just ignore them completely, and you also want to give people the opportunity to vote Green. So we stand candidates in every seat across the country. And so, you know, no matter what the Greens vote is, whether it's most seats, we now get to the 4% threshold where you get public funding kicks in per vote if you get over 4%. And there's only, you know, a handful of seats in the country where we don't get that 4%. So you've got to have enough resources to campaign in those seats so that people, you know, have the opportunity to vote Green, but knowing that we've got to put the resources into the seats where we've got a chance of winning. And as you say, so the key resource that we have in those seats is our people power. And we're never going to win them without having the people on the ground to be out there doing the canvassing, because we know we're never going to get the mainstream media to pay attention to us. We know that the social media now being so narrowcast to people and so much, you know, garbage around in social media, people who aren't already sort of thinking of voting Green are not going to get the message about us through social media. So what we need to do is to have face-to-face, one-on-one conversations with people, person to person, neighbour to neighbour, and say, you know, and so we've had people, you know, hundreds, thousands of people, you know, out there on the streets. Here in Fraser, where I've been campaigning for Hung, we have been out there knocking on doors for about 18 months. So we started off just talking about issues, housing in particular, and, you know, the massive, ridiculous cost of housing, cost of rents, skyrocketing rents, level of homelessness, which is just, you know, increased astronomically. And, you know, in a rich country like Australia, we should not have people just struggling to have the human right of a roof over their head. So we started door knocking 18 months ago, talking to people about these issues, and we've been getting a really good response in the 18 months since. In the last couple of months in the lead up to the election campaign, what that canvassing has looked like is having every week probably about, I think it's been 4 to 6 groups of people that will go out for 3 hours at a time. So they go individually, but they'll gather together. It will be a group of maybe of 6 to 10 people, get their lists, get their walk maps, and off they go and knock on those doors, which is always, even when you've done it many, many times before, it's always a bit, nerve-wracking, because you don't know what's going to be behind that door that you're knocking on. And you have conversations with people. Probably it's about, depending on the weather, where you are, time of day, you might have somewhere between, 1 in 3 to 1 in 10 people home who'll actually answer the door. Most people will be very polite and be, a lot of people very happy to engage, because they've, never had their door knocked before by somebody who's aiming to, representing a political party. You have a conversation ideally about the issues that they're concerned about. So, you ask them what their issues are, what they're concerned about. So that door knocking is listening mostly, rather than telling people this is what the Greens are all about, because that puts people off if you're being completely overwhelmed with information. And then we write up notes about that conversation. We will make an assessment of the person that you're talking to. People, some people will say, yep, I'm already voting Green. Yep, I'm happy to have a poster on my fence. And so, we note that they're a strong Green supporter. We might ask them to help out with the campaign, help out with volunteers. Then you've got, people who are, moderately supportive, but not definitely. People that we sort of categorise as neutral, people who are sort of mildly opposed, and then the strongly opposed. And the people who are strongly opposed, you note that down, and it means that we won't bother going back there again. There's just no point. And so the key people that we want to focus on, if we then have the opportunity over time, are the people who are, in the middle, plus getting the people who are strong supporters to help out with the campaign.
Yeah, we call it kind of canvassing, deep canvassing, where you're not preaching at people, you're listening, you're asking them questions. And in my experience, there are people who they don't support you on policy, but they really appreciate the fact that you came by to like listen to them. And nobody ever did that for them before. So I will get votes from very conservative people that don't agree with me on policy, but they think I care enough to come by and talk to them and listen to them.
Exactly. And you can have that conversation, even if you don't agree on everything. People will say, if you can sort of get to what people's underlying values are, you get people thinking, and people can shift over time.
Yeah, well, there's some good research that the most effective means of political persuasion is this kind of one-on-one canvassing.
Exactly.
And that's how we're going to build our base. So
my cat who's just woken up, so it's probably about to come and jump on my lap.
All right. Well, let's talk about, excuse me, I'm dealing with a cold.
Shall I get you a glass of water?
No, I got that right there. So you got in, when did you get into the Senate and how many terms, and what were some of the highlights and lowlights?
So, going back to the story, so we started the Greens in 1992. I was then building the Greens. I had 2 young kids as well at that stage, so juggling work, family, politics, the usual chaotic juggle. I then decided to throw my hat in the ring for standing for local council here in Footscray. So that was over 20 years ago now that I was elected as a local government councillor in 2003, and I did 2 terms on council. Was a mayor for a year, and that was a really, you can do fantastic stuff as a Green on local council, and B, it gives you the opportunity to know what it's all about, representing people. So then finished up on council and then decided, all right, I'm going to give it a shot to stand first of all for pre-selection, and so I then stood twice for pre-selection without being pre-selected, and Richard Di Natale, who was the senator for Victoria before me, who was the Greens leader for a number of years, he was pre-selected and elected. The first time we had a Greens senator in Victoria elected was 2010 when Richard was elected, and then I was then pre-selected as the lead Senate candidate at the 2013 election.
So pre-selected means the party
chose me. That's
right.
And that's and certainly for our Senate candidates and senators is, if for people who want to be elected as a Green, being elected as a senator is going to give you the greatest security, the most chance of actually being elected, as we were saying before, with our vote of about 12%. With a good campaign, we're pretty confident of getting a senator elected in each state at each election.
So as a recognized party, as soon as they pre-select or nominate, you're on the ballot.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
In America,
and on the top of the ticket. So
that's just the beginning in our country. We have to go out and get signatures on petitions, which varies by state, but in some states it's nearly impossible. And they're making
we have to be a registered party. You've got to have a certain number of members. You've got to have ticked all the boxes in terms of doing all of the things, the administrative things that you need to do as a party. For the Senate ballot, there will be, I don't know how many parties are standing this time, but 20 or so, plus a whole range of people standing as independents also. So I was pre-selected and then elected in 2013, and so I was then in the Senate. I took my seat in the Senate in July 2014 because our Senate terms are fixed terms that start on the 1st of July. So I became a senator on the 1st of July 2014, and I finished up just on a year ago, 2024. So I was there for 10 years.
Two 5-year terms?
No. Oh. So they're meant to be 6-year terms.
Uh-huh.
In the end, the Australian system, even though we have 6-year terms, there is the opportunity for the Prime Minister to decide that they're not getting their stuff through the Senate. It's being blocked in the Senate, and because the Greens largely have either shared balance of power or have had balance of power in the Senate, it's up to us. We've got to vote for something unless the two old parties join together. And so our Conservative government decided to call what's called a double dissolution. So that was just after I had been elected. I'd only been there for 18 months, and we then had another election. And then, so both Richard and myself were up for election. Richard, and then in the case of a double dissolution, the senator on the top of the ticket gets a 6-year term, and I only got a 3-year term. So I was then up for election again in 2019, and then I got a 6-year term, but I resigned 4 years into that 6-year term, which is usually how we change senators, because if you resign midterm, the party then gets the opportunity to nominate your replacement. So it means that the Victorian senator who's here now, Steph Hodgins-May, she had a chance to get her feet under the desk, get herself set up, get her staff, and be ready to be campaigning to be re-elected. So she's up for election this time. Yeah, so it was an amazing privilege to be a senator and to be there being a representative of the community, to be able to speak up and be passionate. In terms of being a legislator, it was incredibly frustrating because 8 years of my 10 years, we had, very conservative governments. We had Tony Abbott, followed by Malcolm Turnbull, followed by Scott Morrison, or Liberal Party prime ministers who were trying to enact a very, regressive agenda. And so most of the highlights of those 10 years in terms of legislation were stopping really bad things from happening and getting tiny improvements to really bad things happening. But the biggest highlight of my time, absolutely, during the whole time, was getting marriage equality passed. So I was the Greens LGBTIQA+ spokesperson and was really actively involved with the negotiations. So I don't know how much your listeners will know, probably not much, about getting marriage equality passed. It was interesting that it was done under a Conservative government because they were essentially, there was a bit of, pincer movement to force them to do it, but they made us go through a public vote. So we had a postal plebiscite, and then they committed that if there was a majority of the community that was in support of it, that they would legislate for it. And so we had our marriage equality postal plebiscite, which had, I think, 70% of the Australian voters voted in favour of marriage equality. And so then we had legislation that needed to get through. And the key role that I played was working with senators from the Liberal Party, from the Labor Party, myself, in a committee, negotiating clause by clause as to what our marriage equality legislation would look like.
And what year did that? When
that was 2017. So end of 2017.
That's when the legislation passed. The plebiscite was.
It was November. So 15th of November 2017 was when the plebiscite passed, and then we had legislation that would pass. I think it was the 9th or 7th of December. So
we actually got there earlier, and I've never seen public opinion flip on an issue so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2004, George W. Bush and his Bush's brain, forget what it's Karl Rove, they put anti-marriage equality legislation, anti-LGBTQ referendums on states to try to mobilize the Republican vote. And it might have helped a little bit that year, but within a decade, public opinion had totally flipped.
Yeah.
And you had people like Dick Cheney, very conservative Republican, saying, my daughter's a lesbian, so
exactly,
I want equality. And
exactly. People knew, because people who were queer were confident enough to come out as being queer, people realised that, my neighbour, my daughter, my friend, my partner, is queer. That's right. And so people realised it was a personal thing. But certainly the US getting marriage equality was a big fill up to our campaign of saying, it happened in the US, the sky didn't fall in, it can happen here.
And for the American audience, you should know that it was not the Democrats that led on this issue, it was the Greens. In 2003, I think even before these Karl Rove referendums, we were doing marriage equality in New York State.
Yeah.
We had a Green mayor and deputy mayor. They started doing it. The liberal attorney general got an injunction against them. And at that point, Barack Obama was evolving on the question. And as the public opinion polls changed, he evolved with them. But the Democrats did not lead on this.
Yeah.
When we did the marriage equality, even the gay advocate groups like the Human Rights Campaign were saying, no, don't do that. You're going to create a backlash.
Yeah.
And what we did was open up, made people deal with it. And when they
Exactly.
did, they wanted equality.
And similarly here, the Labor Party was so backwards. They didn't come out with a policy of being pro-equality until, it was the mid, it was 2012 or something like that. It was well into the campaign, whereas, we as Greens, when Bob Brown was in the Senate, he introduced the first legislation for marriage equality into the Parliament in 2006. Because up until then, our laws didn't explicitly say that marriage had to be between, couldn't be between two same-sex people. And increasingly, people, even though they couldn't get married here, were going overseas and getting married and then coming back. And so then our Conservatives, they actually changed the law to say, no, you can only be married in Australia if you're opposite sex. And so we immediately introduced legislation to try and change that, in 2006. And it took, 11 years of fierce campaigning, and very much like most, the successful campaigns that we've had, it was us being the representatives of the movement. You needed to have this massive mobilised community movement, and that we could then reflect and, we could be there and be the representative of that movement in the Parliament.
Yeah, and we can be the catalyst for change that the people are ready for, but the political system isn't.
Exactly.
So, we shouldn't be discouraged. I mean, I've been through so many movements, from anti-Vietnam War to anti-nuclear power to the ban on fracking we got in New York State, where we were a vilified minority with the political establishment, the media. And meanwhile, the people are saying, these guys are right. And they came around and we eventually got the changes. So
it's very much the case, for the campaign for Palestine and against the genocide in Palestine at the moment, is that you've got, the rest of the political establishment all being silent. They'll say, oh, yes, Israel, bad, but they're not doing anything. So no sanctions. We haven't expelled our Israeli ambassador. We haven't done anything about our trade. We're still exporting, military equipment to Israel, even though, we've got a Labor Party that says, very bad, very bad. We're calling on Israel to, abide by humanitarian rules. Which is just absolutely pathetic. And that's, they're absolutely complicit in the genocide, whereas the Greens have been there leading in the Parliament and actually speaking out and saying there's a genocide going on, and that we need to be taking serious action and not just standing by and watching it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I went past one of the polling places. They call it
the usual terminology is pre-polling. Officially, they are early voting centres.
Right. And we came across it. It was across the street from the state legislature in New South Wales. Mm-hmm. Is that no? Wait, we're in New South Wales.
No, we're in Victoria now.
Okay, this was in Canberra. That's New South.
No,
Wales?
That's the Australian Capital Territory.
Okay, the Australian Capital Territory. New South Wales,
like Washington D.C.
Okay, I'm still learning my geography. In any case, state legislature across the street is what they call pre-polling or early voting. And all the parties are out there with their signs and people handing literature. The distance to the polling place is 6 meters, which is much closer than most places in the United States. In my experience in New York, the law says 100 feet. But I will show up at polling places, and usually the Democrats inside will call the police and tell them to get rid of me. And I'll have to tell the police, call the Board of Election, I have a right to be here. And it's just harassment. But the thing that struck me was, up on the pole above, this stuff going on the street, was this poster that said, boldly sanction Israel. Which
absolutely. What we should be doing. Israel needs to realize that there are consequences. And at the moment, you've got the Western world just standing by and saying, doing nothing.
And American public opinion, similarly, the Senate just had a vote that Bernie Sanders initiated to cut off arms to Israel. It only got 15 out of 100 senators. And they have yet to force a vote in the House, so we're not sure what we got there.
Well, at least there are 15. That's good to hear.
That's a start, but it shows how far we have to go.
Absolutely.
And so we'll talk about working on climate change and how that's gone in Australia, since you got into the Senate. I know you've had conservative governments, and they've been kind of like drill, baby, drill.
Absolutely. Well, so my 10 years in the Senate, so we had 8 years of conservative governments, and then we had 2 years of the Labor government led by Anthony Albanese, which has been underwhelming, to say the least. And so Labor have continued with our fossil fuel led economy. Australia is absolutely a global player. We're a petro state. We export. I think we're the second biggest coal exporter in the world. We vary as to whether we're in the top 5 of natural gas exporters as well. And so there are a huge number of countries that are dependent on that buy our Australian coal and gas. And so if Australia decided that it was going to stop mining and stop exporting coal and gas, we could make a huge difference in terms of world carbon emissions. But our Labor government is as complicit as the Conservatives in basically saying, no, we're just going to keep on expanding our coal mines, allowing massive new gas developments, fracking developments against the wishes of First Nations owners as well in Western Australia and Northern Territory, and just let's keep on going. So what we've got going on is in our two old parties is Labor say that they're taking action on climate. They say that they will, comply with our Paris agreements, but in fact haven't got a decent plan to do. A, their targets are too weak, and B, they haven't got a plan how to do it. So we've got a bit more investment in renewables in terms of our domestic energy use. But meanwhile, we just keep on exporting to the world, and that doesn't get counted, of course, under Australia's emissions because they're Scope 3 emissions as to what we export to the rest of the world. So not serious at all, whereas, we look at the science and, from my background as a climate scientist, it's just been tragic to just see, and particularly over the last 5 years, to see all the climate modelling just coming true in front of our very eyes in terms of the rising temperatures, the fires, the floods, the intense events, the warming oceans, the 80% of the world's coral reefs being bleached in this, the last bleaching event. It's gut wrenching. So we keep on fighting the good fight. We keep on trying to keep it at the focus of people's attentions. We will keep on talking about climate. For example, we have in the Senate, we have a couple of questions in question time every day. Okay, puss, that's all right. And we make sure that of those questions every week that, there will be questions on climate and environment every week, which usually get battered off and you get the most ridiculous, farcical answers from the government. But we keep on talking about it and again, being the representative of the climate movement in the parliament to keep on speaking out.
Yeah, it's... when I was working on developing the Green New Deal that I ran on for governor in 2010 in New York, which was the first American politician to run on that theme, I was looking at a think tank down here in Australia for some of their scenarios of how to get to 100% clean energy. At that time, by 2020. Yeah. I can't remember the name of it right now.
Beyond zero emissions.
Yep, you're right. Yeah. And they were, looking around the world, they were one of the probably top 3 institutes that were thinking that through and had plans that I could cite to say this is possible.
Exactly.
Technologically. I mean, my argument was it's economically feasible, it's technically feasible. What's missing is the political will.
Exactly.
And, at that time, 2010, we're coming out of the Great Recession. So it would have been a huge economic stimulus to begin building a clean renewable energy system and replacing the old fossil fuel based system.
Yeah, it's absolutely, as you say, Howie, it's been technologically possible for us to fast track the shift to 100% renewable energy globally for decades. But it's the political will and it's the power of the fossil fuel companies, and the fact that which also then links up with how compromised our major parties are. I mean, both the Labor and Liberal Party here in Australia still accept massive donations from fossil fuel companies. And they have the revolving door of people who are in the parliament, and then they resign from the parliament, and then they're in cushy jobs with mining companies. And you've got similarly people who are in those jobs in mining companies happen to get pre-selected and are then in the parliament. So it's all this nepotism and this ecosystem which our Labor and Liberal parties are absolutely part of that sort of fossil fuel attacks on the world.
So what are your thoughts? How are we going to beat these people? Because they are, driving us off a cliff.
Yep. It's going to be continuing to build our community movements. And, the Greens, we've got our 4 pillars of the Greens of social justice, environment, peace and non-violence, and participatory democracy, and we need all of them. And particularly in building our political power, it's building the power of the movements and actually giving people the sense of agency and the fact that they can make a difference. Because one of the things that puts most people off from, feeling that it's worth really doing anything is the sense of, oh, yeah, I'm concerned about that, but what can I do? I can't do anything. And I know that people will be feeling that in the US at the moment with sort of all of the attacks on democracy that's sort of under Trump, of feeling so browbeaten and so feeling, oh, that's awful, but what can I do about it? So it's actually working with people to give them that sense of agency and that change is possible. And for me, my political philosophy over the years has been that we need to work at 3 levels simultaneously. We need to be working at that big picture level of getting that strategic structural change, but it takes time. I thought, 10 years in the Senate that we might have achieved some, stuff. In fact, my first speech, I said, in my time in the Senate, when I finish here, I want to be able to look my grandchildren in the eye and saying, we're on track to a safe climate. Sadly, after my 10 years in the Senate, we are no closer than what we were, or maybe we're this much closer than we were. So that big picture change, we've just got to keep on working on it and not get disillusioned that we haven't achieved that change. Just because we haven't achieved it by now doesn't mean we won't. We've just got to keep on working. But that can be pretty demoralising because of how long and big it is. So as well as working at that level, you've then got to be working at a community level to be achieving change that you've actually got agency. And so whether that's in local government, whether it's working in a community garden, getting community renewables, so something that people can feel, hey, I'm working with a group of people and it's having results. And so you're building community, you're actually feeling, you're building the islands of coherence of here's how the world could work if we're all like this. And then thirdly, doing the stuff that you can do individually that you've got complete agency over. And, we can't change the world just by everybody changing their light bulbs and catching public transport and riding their bike, but you've got to feel aligned. So to give you that sense of knowing that your life you're doing as much as you can to be aligned with the bigger picture aims that you're working for.
Yeah, I think that intermediate level you're talking about is really important. We've lost civic organizations, trade unions, political parties, social clubs, the things people used to do before TV came along, and now these, screens that everybody's on. And so people aren't talking to each other. They're talking about each other through screens, or mainly getting messages from corporate entities.
And people are being victimized and people, really the division of sort of pitting people against each other and that sense that you can't trust anybody. And if you had that sense that you can't trust anybody, well, then, you don't feel you've got any agency at all to do things. Whereas if you can build your sense of community and know that we have power, as a movement, we've got power, people can, actually have a sense that we can achieve change.
Well, and a grassroots group you get a sense of your agency, whatever you're doing, a community garden or, getting a stop sign at a dangerous corner, whatever it is, you begin to see that you can make a difference. You can't fight City Hall. I find, and I got this from canvassing over decades, is that most people are not apathetic.
No.
They're alienated.
Yes,
and
exactly.
They feel powerless. So a lot of people stop following the news because they think it just hurts too much. I just don't want to know.
Exactly.
And,
exactly. And so people make sensible decisions for their own mental health to stay out of it. I mean, you've got to be building community and getting people to be enjoying the company of other people, having fun doing what you're doing. And the work that I'm now doing, now that I'm out of the Senate, is working with community organisations and within the Greens to be helping people work well together and resolving conflict, work collaboratively. We've got a commitment in the Greens here in Australia that in our constitution to make decisions by consensus, which means, doing that well, working together with people. And so we can be effective as community movements, because I think that's the critical thing that we need to be doing, is to be building those movements, building effective movements, and movements that people really enjoy being part of and feel powerful of being part of.
Yeah, I think that's another thing those community level organizations do. You want to make them places people want to be at because their friends are there. It's fun. It's enjoyable.
Yeah.
And then, people get a sense of their power as they do things. How about the Global Greens? What's been your involvement in that? We first met at the South Korean Global Greens Congress in 2023.
Well, I'm one of only 2 people in the world who have been to every Global Greens Congress. The other one, I can't remember his name. Green from
Mike Feinstein.
Mike Feinstein. That's right.
States, yeah.
Mike and I are the only 2 people who have been to every Global Greens Congress. So I've been actively involved in the Global Greens since the start. The first Global Greens Congress was here in Australia, in Canberra, in 2001, I think it was. So my main involvement has been through the Asia Pacific Greens Federation, and particularly working with the Asia Pacific Greens Federation Women's Network. And so I've been mentoring young women in parties across the Asia Pacific, Indonesia, Japan, currently mentoring a woman in Papua New Guinea. And I've got a trip to PNG next month. So Andrew Kutape, who's here with you on this trip, I'm going to PNG and going to be doing some work with Andrew and with their women's network there, a wonderful woman, Frida, who's the convener of their women's network, to be supporting their candidates in their local government elections.
I interviewed Frida and she was on this podcast last week.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So
I'm passionate about the Global Greens because we've, as well as having that, sense of achievement and power in our local, here in Australia, it's such a wonderful, thing to have, to know that there are Greens all around the world and that we've got this global network of Greens parties all around the world who are committed to the same things. And that in itself gives you a sense of hope that we're not doing this on our own, and so many of the problems that we face are global, so we've got to be organised globally. So I'm really committed, to be helping and supporting the Global Greens and building the Greens in PNG. As I said, I'm supporting Vanuatu and the Solomons in particular, 2 other countries that I'm really keen to be doing some work with. I had hoped to be doing more on that since I finished up in the Senate a year ago, but I've managed to keep myself fairly busy doing a whole range of different things. So I'm really looking forward to the trip to PNG next month.
I was a truck unloader at UPS, punching the clock, working the graveyard shift. And I thought when I retired, I'd have more time. But everybody in politics says, you don't have to work now. You can do this, you can do that, and I'm busier than I've ever been.
Exactly.
So, be careful. Watch out about retirement people.
Yeah. I'm going to have a good hard talking to myself after our election. So the election's on the 3rd of May, and the 4th of May I'm going to say, Janet, you are going to have more time. You're going to have more time for yourself, more time out in nature. Because that's the other thing in terms of staying sane and staying inspired in the face of all of these crises that we face. Being connected with nature is just so important to me, to sort of feel that sense of the power and the beauty and the awe and the inspiration that I get from nature, whether it's here in my garden or, out in amazing forests or amazing coastal areas or deserts or wherever I get to.
Well, I think the international aspect of the Greens has attracted American Greens to the Greens. But what we did in America, and I didn't agree with this, but we pulled out of the Federation of the Green Parties of the Americas, which pulled us out of the Global Greens Congress. And so now we're isolated. We don't have formal relations with other Green parties around the world. And, Americans, I think we tend to be chauvinistic and think we know better than other people. It's a colonial mindset. And I think it'd be humbling for a lot of American Greens to have political discussion with Greens from all over the world, because Americans are going to learn a lot. and they're going to have their eyes open, and they're also going to realize that we need each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we're dealing with global corporations like in the fossil fuel industry, if we're going to defeat them, we got to have coordinated action globally.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a real pity that the Greens in the US pulled out of the global Greens. And again, it's, surely if there was conflict, it's something that we needed to be able to work through. And that's, for me, with my passionate commitment to collaboration and to consensus, it's actually sort of doing that really good conflict resolution work and actually, getting the US Greens sitting down with the people and the other people that, they had concerns with, and actually working through that conflict and getting through to something that you could all live with, so that you felt that you could be, back as part of the Global Greens family. Yeah,
there were definitely issues that, we had to address, but instead of walking away, and the American Greens said, we'll join the Sao Paulo Forum that Lula had set up. But by the time the American Greens are going to it, that thing's divided. Lula and Petro don't like Noriega and Maduro, will become very authoritarian. And they said, we don't want the American Greens anyway. So we're kind of isolated. And so that's one of my projects, try to get the American Greens to re-affiliate with the Federation of American Green Parties, and then from there to the Global Greens. And if we got issues, let's debate them.
Absolutely. Let's work them through. Yeah.
So I'm checking on the time. We got about 14 more minutes. So,
okay.
Are there any particular issues you've been working on that you would like to share with our audience?
Look, in addition to some that we've touched on, the other one, and you just prompted by talking about the US as a colonial world, a colonial society, is First Nations justice around the world, and it's another thing that here in Australia is just so politically polarised, but so fundamental to be working out how we decolonise and be working for First Nations justice, and acknowledging that we are here as settler colonial society, and sovereignty. We didn't even have treaties, unlike I know the treaties in the US were at times pretty appalling documents, and they were never complied with, but we didn't even have any treaties here. And so we've never had treaties with our First Nations peoples, and it's just fundamental for us as a society to be at peace with itself, to acknowledge the work that we need to do to be achieving First Nations justice here in Australia.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me when I got here is that how recent the settler colonial experience here was. 1788, I think, is when the first British colony landed. We were starting the United States of America then, and had been in North America since that was 1700s for 200 years. And so our origin in a settler colonial society is more distant from the American public, I think, than it would be in Australia. Yeah,
and there's still so much racism and prejudice and blaming of First Nations peoples. We came in, we destroyed their society, we destroyed their culture, we destroyed their food, we, took their children away, there were massacres, there was disease, there was everything. And so not surprisingly, the people, incredibly resilient people that got through all of that, there are some consequences of, having that done to your society. And then there's still so many people in the Australian community who will then blame First Nations peoples for social issues and social problems and, family dysfunction, when it's absolutely a consequence of that whole settler colonialism, attempted genocide, essentially. And so, giving power back to First Nations peoples and sort of self-empowerment for communities to be able to have the power to decide for themselves as to how they organise their lives and how, we build our future together. I mean, we can't go back to 1788, but we've got to work out how we move forward peacefully together. And I think that doing that is so important for then us also being confident in our place in the world. So if you're working, when you are supporting the people of Palestine and seeing, Israel's attacks on Palestine is a settler colonial war that they are fighting. For me, I'm the co-chair of the Australia-Tibet Council, and so doing a lot of advocacy in Tibet. And, China's operations in Tibet are a colonial operation, basically, of oppressing the Tibetan people in order for access to resources and land and water in particular. I'm also pretty passionate about West Papua, and the Indonesian oppression and occupation of West Papua, which is a colonial operation as well. And so, for Australia as a whole to see our place in the world, we've got to acknowledge our settler colonialism and then be working to decolonise sort of all around, particularly the region, but around the world.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is, in my estimation, is a green tradition going back to Petra Kelly and Rudy Dutschke when they were running around Germany trying to say we need a green party, and they were very explicit about how we need to push for democracy in the East Bloc as well as the West, and we need to oppose nuclear power in both blocks, nuclear missiles in both blocks. We weren't going to be aligned in the Cold War, and in that, I think the American Greens, to a lot of them, have lost that, because there are people there that will say the only imperialism in the world is U.S. imperialism. So they don't want to talk about China and Tibet or Indonesia and West.
So frustrated with it. I mean, what's going on in the US at the moment is just mind-bogglingly awful, and the US imperialism, which has just been amplified under Trump. But there is imperialism that's going on in all of these countries, and just because that's happening in the US doesn't mean that it's not happening in China. And you've got to be able to call out human rights abuses and call out the imperialism wherever it occurs.
Yeah, and I think it reflects a US-centric mentality. It's American chauvinism. We're the center of the world, so anything imperialism does, we did it.
Yeah.
And nobody else has an imperialism. And we get people who will, apologize for Putin's Russia or Assad's Syria because they're anti-US, as if that's anti-imperialist. Yes. Whereas they're actually, I would call them alter-imperialists. They're supporting another block of imperialist countries. And
absolutely,
that is not, where the left and the Greens should be at. Mm. So, that's a big issue. I find it's not an issue here in Australia on the left, but it certainly is in the United States. And I guess that's a legacy of the Cold War. And
well, we've certainly got parties of the left and people on the left who every time I speak about the rights of Tibetans, will tell me, they will attack me on social media and say, no, China is, doing wonderful things and they brought civilization to Tibet, absolutely buying the Chinese line. And there are plenty of people here like that too, but not in the Greens. So our Greens policy is very much, we will call out colonialism, imperialism, human rights abuses wherever they occur. And one of my favourite parts of being in the Senate was, I had the opportunity to give an adjournment speech every week. And every week I would give an adjournment speech on human rights somewhere in the world. So I spoke out about Tibet, about Bangladesh, about, Afghanistan, everywhere. So I actually named all the countries that I had spoken out about and the people and the communities in my valedictory speech. And it went on for a while. And having that opportunity to be an advocate on the Philippines, another one, I got thrown out of the parliament for speaking up about human rights when we had President Marcos Jr.
Tell us a little more about that.
Yes. Marcos Jr. was invited to speak to a joint sitting of the Australian Parliament, despite the appalling human rights abuses that are occurring under him because of the military relationship between Australia, the US, the Philippines. And so I was appalled and thought I needed to do something. And so we had a joint sitting, which meant the senators all go into the House, and I had this folded up little sign with me that I brought in with my notes. And then when he started speaking, I unfolded this sign and held it up, and I wanted it to be something that I couldn't be sued for if it got shared elsewhere. So it just said, "What about human rights?" That was all it said. And he saw the sign. He kept speaking. The president of the House, the Speaker of the House, they saw the sign, and there was a clerk who was then dispatched to come and talk to me and ask me to remove myself from the House. That the Speaker had asked me to leave the House, so I then got myself up and left. So, and I was one of the things that I'm proudest of having done in my time in the Senate. It went viral in the Philippines. And just, speaking up for the rights of Filipino people who are being absolutely, continuing to be oppressed, and the red tagging, the killings, that are going on, the oppression, the jailings of human rights activists, of unionists, of environmentalists is just going on in the Philippines at the moment. And again, supported by the US, supported by Australia. Yeah.
Well, one issue where the US and Australia come together on militarism is this AUKUS.
Yes.
Tell Americans about that.
Oh, God, the AUKUS deal, which is essentially Australia buying nuclear submarines from the US. So it's Australia, the US, and the UK. Nobody in the Greens believes we're ever going to get our submarines. In fact, the first part of the deal is us giving billions of dollars to the US to build your own submarines, the Virginia-class nuclear submarines. So that's the first part of the deal. And we're not going to actually get submarines for, I can't even remember, it's 15 years or more. They're bringing us into the nuclear industry because we don't have a nuclear industry in Australia. So we will have to establish all of a nuclear industry in order to service and maintain these submarines. They are going to cost over $300 billion over the lifespan of this AUKUS. And, meanwhile, we've got people, money that people, we can't afford to put dental care under our Medicare system. We've got slashing of public education, public health. You've got, people at unis absolutely under massive amounts of student debt that we say should be wiped. So many things you could spend $300 billion on, and yet we're giving it to the US to build nuclear submarines that, frankly, even if you look at the defence of Australia, I mean, we reckon that we should have an independent defence, that we should cut the Australia-US alliance, and we should be independent. So even if you're looking at what is appropriate defence for Australia, having a fleet of 9 nuclear submarines is just such a waste. It's not going to achieve your defence needs either at massive costs. So the Greens are very strong that we should not be proceeding with the AUKUS agreement. And, one of the perhaps, I won't say it's a silver lining, but a consequence of, Trump's fascism in the US is, I think there's a lot more questioning as to how closely tied we should be to the US with, an authoritarian, undemocratic fascist government now in power.
And we're part of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing. Yeah. Is the Australian national security people, are they getting concerned that maybe they shouldn't share with Trump?
I'm sure they are. And, we've got US military bases here in Australia, in particular Pine Gap, which is near Alice Springs in the centre of Australia, where there is just so much, there's a massive US military presence there. We've got a US military presence in Darwin in the Northern Territory as well. But Pine Gap, huge amount of intelligence that just flows to and fro. So we are absolutely complicit in it. And yes, how much of that intelligence is now flowing on to Putin's Russia? We just, don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cat said amen.
Right. Exactly. Trieste degrees.
Well, I'm going to have probably next month sometime, David Shoebridge, who's a current Green senator, who's working on this AUKUS issue. We're just going to focus on that.
Yes.
And also I'm going to have Dominic Wykenak. I hope I pronounced his name right. He's an Aboriginal member of the executive of the Green Party here.
Yes.
We'll talk about those issues. So we'll have more about the Australian Greens coming up. And we're running up on our time. Is there anything else you would like to share with the Greens?
Look, just
in America?
Keep on keeping on, really. Yes, do you come back into the Global Greens fold, but, we've just got to all keep on working together and feel that sense of community and the power that we have of being part of a movement globally, and that we know that we're all working on the same stuff, that we will keep on working on it. We're never going to give up. I mean, it's one of my favourite, phrases, one of the Dalai Lama's phrases, never give up. And, be inspired by the resistance, the resilience of people who have been fighting for justice over generations, and know that, for me, it's a sense of the baton was passed to me. I'm going to pass the baton on at the end of my life. But meanwhile, I'm just going to keep on going. And let's keep working together and never give up.
Okay, well, thank you for being on. And I've been doing these recordings from down under because the time zone is so different. But next week I'll be live. It's May 3rd. It's when the Australian election's happening, except they're a day ahead of us. So when we have May 3rd, they'll already be May 4th, and we'll know,
the results.
We'll know how the Australian Greens did. So we'll talk about that. And of course, we got to talk about what Trump is doing and how we respond. So next week, same time, same place, 3 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. And thanks for being here, and everybody have a good week.
Thanks, Howie.